Welcome to the Swiss Army knife of podcasts. Unlike the Swiss Army knife, we are cheap, more freely available, and a lovely thing to get in your ears and eyes. That's right, folks. It's the open source, where, of course, Tom and I are joined by our special guest today, Dave Rowan. Welcome, Dave.
Thanks for having me.
Nice to see you, Dave. And no, it's not Halloween, but we're going to talk a little bit about all things headless. Mostly headless CMSs as opposed to other headless things.
I hope so.
Well, let's start with something a little bit different. So here's our headline of the week. Because everyone loves cats, the internet loves cats. Guys, I thought this was hilarious. I saw this the other day and thought, how have they done that?
The headline is, "A terrifying optical illusion of headless cat confuses the internet." A very broad statement, isn't it? Confuses the internet.
I think it's supposed to be one cat, isn't it?
Is it one of those special filters where it does the thing and then the cat's moved position in that time?
Yeah,
Amazing.
It's a cat turning to the right, and I think the other cat is in the basket.
Yeah, I think so. Oh, there you go. Look, of course. Two cats. There was two cats.
See, what a metaphor for life that is.
What we actually came here to talk about today, though, which is our real news article of the week, is this: what's driving demand for headless CMS at the moment? For those of you who don't know, I'm going to give the layman's version of a CMS, and then in a minute, Dave, you can tell me that I was completely wrong and this is actually what it means, because I'm not a developer. But the way that I think about a headless CMS is the front of a CMS, the head of a CMS, is what we see here on this webpage, right? It's how the content's presented and so on and so forth. If something is headless, it means that all of the content, so the words and the pictures and so on and so forth, is separated from whatever is used to display that information. And so that could mean that it's just two different systems that are connected, or it could mean that your purpose for curating that content means that you don't need to display it somewhere. Is that about right?
Yeah. I mean, in short, the way to think about it is display and content. With a traditional CMS, you control the display in the way that the CMS determines you control that display. In a headless setup, you can ultimately have the flexibility to control the display in any way that you so wish. So that becomes particularly useful when you start thinking about other channels. Other than just the traditional website, that could be pushing to, an app on your phone. It could be pushing content out to, in a feed format to be ingested by something else. So, headless has become more and more popular because of the flexibility associated with the way in which you can control that display and the content. So
it's kind of the Mr. Potato Head of the internet.
Yeah. And if you think back, many, many moons ago, the sort of notion that actually you would be giving developers all the level of control that they wished in terms of sort of composing websites was a pretty standard thought process, because it was always the case of actually to develop a website. Those of you that can remember back to things like Dreamweaver, or even as far back as, beyond that, it's like people hard coding it like a notepad in order to produce and display content on a website. So developers had a lot of control back in the day. And then we sort of moved into a position where actually traditional CMSs were born. And with traditional CMSs, it was like, right, let's make this super user friendly for the business user, and the consumer of that content. So the idea that you could compose content really, really easily and really straightforward, came up to the forefront. And then now we've got into a position where actually, we're working in a multi-channel world. So we're not just thinking about content and displays for a website. We're thinking about content and displays across a multitude of different channels. So actually what we need now is some options and some flexibility to be able to say, hey, if I'm not just doing a website and I'm having to produce content and display it in lots of other places, perhaps my development team need that additional flexibility to be able to control how that display looks, or what that display looks like and where it goes. And that's kind of where headless ultimately sort of fits into this multi-channel world.
So do you think there are particular industries or types of company that would have a or be more likely to have a headless requirement than others?
Headless is a really good fit for retail, insofar as if you think about what makes up a standard page on a retail website, you're not just going to have the core product content information. You're potentially going to have like blocks that perhaps show the best sellers or recommended products. You're potentially going to have cart information. So you're going to have a multitude of different types of information that are, in all likelihood, going to be coming from multiple different back-end systems as well. So they're not all going to be driven from the CMS. And as a result, you're going to need, as a developer, to be able to compose that sort of product page, that beautiful looking page, in a way that you can pull in information from lots of different places.
What are the risks of doing that? Are there any sort of common risks or considerations of doing that?
One of the challenges with headless ultimately is that you're re-empowering developers. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing, but what that often means is in the balance of power in terms of business user versus technical user, actually what you're doing is you're handing over a lot more power against the technical user. And that can be fine, but what that can run a risk of doing is actually creating sort of heavy implementation times, because you're dependent upon developers almost to do everything.
Where does the governance for that come from in terms of like the content? Does it come from the back end in terms of the design aspect, or is it somewhere else? Like where do how are they collaborating to make sure that all the developers given that freedom are staying on trend, if you like?
So you can talk about fully headless over here, which is the thing we've just been discussing. Developers get all the power. Business users sort of become more dependent on developers. The other end of the scale is what we talked about in terms of traditional CMS. Everything's managed by CMS, so kind of not headless at all. There is something in the middle though that we refer to as sort of a hybrid approach. So you sort of take the best of a traditional CMS in terms of managing and composing your content. So composing, you'll hear the word composing a lot in a lot of what vendors are talking about now, sort of composable architecture, and composing content in a way that you can then use a headless approach to control the display of that content. So best of both worlds.
It seemed to me as a non-technical person on the outside that hybrid model that you talked about, depending on the applications that you're using or the CMS that you're using, there could be either pre-built or just open API options for companies to connect applications together and share content in that way, as opposed to something that might be a fully developed kind of headless thing. Is that hybrid mode that you're talking about, or?
It is. So lots of all of the major CMS players will have a traditional method by which they display content, which for you and I is looking at the end web page. So that'd be like a display mode. But all of the big players will also have a mechanism by which you could present that content in a data format, in a structured format. So for a lot of people, that'll look like gobbledygook. It could take, for those more technical listening or watching, it could take the form of an XML or JSON feed. So there's various ways in which you can display that structured content, but it's in a data format. So that takes the form of an API then. So you're exposing that in a way that then another application could say, hey, I'm a native mobile app on an iPhone. I can't display a traditional web page, how you would on a desktop, but I still need the same content.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reach out to that CMS and I'm going to get that same content that's presented in a different way on a website. It's exactly the same, gone through the same workflow, had the same level of sign off, and I'm going to grab it in this different format and I'm going to ingest it into my app.
So an example of composable content that's maybe been passed through an API, would be like when I'm doom scrolling on Instagram and I see a product that's featured in a post and you can click on that product. That's come from somebody's commerce system, right? But it's just been passed through to Instagram through an API.
Exactly that. So, what you don't want is this challenge of multiple silos of data all over the place, duplicating content all over the place, when actually, no, take a composable approach. I'm going to use my CMS. I'm going to create my content once, and then I'm going to make it available to different platforms or different endpoints from a technical perspective, dependent upon, what format they need, how they need to ingest it.
From a marketing perspective, that's pretty key, isn't it? Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, exactly. Let's say that you sell socks. I don't know why I picked socks, but I did. And you could possibly sell that through your own website, third-party retailers, social media accounts, even things like Facebook Messenger you can buy products through, other third-party marketplaces. And they're just the places that your product is available to sell through. Never mind the places that you might market your product that you can't buy through. So you might put, display ads, you might have remarketing, you might have Google ads. And if the price, let's say, of your socks goes from $9.99 for a pack of 5 to $8.99 because there's a sale, if you've got 10 different places where you need to update that, as a marketer, that would be a nightmare if you had to do that all manually. And it would create weeks of work a year for your team just in duplication of effort.
Yeah. So I guess going back to the cat analogy, a good user experience is they'd see one cat and not two different cats.
They just see the face of the cat and that's all they care about.
Yeah.
And are you seeing this much more than ever, given the circumstances now as well with the C word?
Absolutely. I mean, I would say it comes up in the vast majority of conversations that we actually have. It's people recognize that there is something there in headless. As to exactly what it means for their respective business, that's often to be determined. And that's something that, certainly me and my team, help customers and prospects with. Compared to where we were, say, 2 or 3 years ago, it's highly prevalent now.
Interesting.
Dave, if you've seen any of our open sources, we sometimes play a game where we try and come up with business ideas. So playing off that a little bit, this isn't necessarily a business idea competition, but it's more where could we use headless as a solution? And so I'd like to challenge us all with where could a headless CMS provide, real world benefit in a business idea type of way that hasn't been done before? I'm going to go first to give you two a little bit of time to think on your feet. And so some of you who watch the podcast know that I like to play golf as well as drink beer in my back garden bar. But so my example is on the golf course, when you stand on a tee, there's usually a little plaque that tells you, firstly, what number hole you're on, just in case you've forgotten, the shots that you should take on that hole to come in to the course par, the par of the hole, the difficulty of the hole, which is called the stroke index. So it ranks that hole compared to all the other holes on the course, as well as the distance. Well, what if instead of that little brass plaque on the floor, that you had a little screen and it not only showed a map of the hole that you're about to play, where the water hazards are, where the bunkers are, but also where the pin position was that day, so where the flag was on the green, and the live real distance from where you're stood to where the flag is, as opposed to what's normally on one of these things is the distance from where the tee is to where the middle of the green is. Whether golf clubs would want big TV screens across their beautifully manicured landscape.
That's a good idea.
And the risk of being nicked as well. That'd
be fine. But anyway, that's my idea. So I don't know if you guys have got something.
But where headless really can play well is that where you have situations, and actually, Tom, your golf one could be one of these situations where connectivity is an issue. So I was thinking about it in terms of, this could be third world, it could be expedition, but where you want to utilize a CMS either from a data collection perspective of some description, so the ability to input data into, or make data available, but with limited or no connectivity. Traditional CMS is, need that real world internet connection, whereas actually headless CMSs don't. So that in itself as a capability opens up the possibilities of where you could, make use of a CMS where traditionally you wouldn't be able to.
Okay, so this could be somewhere really remote, basically, is what you're saying, like a really remote application. Interesting.
Yeah.
J-Law, what are you thinking?
I'm going to piggyback on both of your ideas, and sort of that's what they say, isn't it? Stand on the shoulders of whatever.
Stand on the shoulders of giants. I mean, because me and you stood next to each other, James.
For me, everyone's a giant, so I'll be standing on everyone's shoulders. Let's see if this gets cut out or not. But the golf idea, right? But then take that forward to think how hard it's going to be for single people to meet other people after this COVID outbreak. Take that golf idea and apply it to singletons, right? And you can get proximity on someone that's willing to, who's open to dating or whatever. It's kind of like the next level Tinder, right?
Is it like Tinder meets Pokemon, where all of a sudden you're...
That's exactly what it's like. And what you do is you hold your phone up to them and it sort of scans them and it says, that's good, physically and mentally. And then it feeds it into your phone, which you can then take offline and sit at home and go, oh, I was in proximity of that lovely person that I met the other day. I know, and I'm tracking them now. Actually, this is quite creepy, isn't it?
I was just going to say, is there a creepy scale? Ding, 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 ding.
You can set a creepiness level, and as a user, you can set your open to creepiness level, and that way you know whether you should approach someone or not. And I think that's also good for dog walkers, because quite a lot of dog walkers get spoken to by other dog walkers, and sometimes you just don't want to chat to these people, so you just set it up in the app and go, yeah, I'm open for a conversation today. And the other dog walker says, yeah, me too. Right, they're safe. It's sort of like the tracking thing.
I would use it on the dog walking piece, because that's basically my life most mornings. With I don't want to talk to you piece.
Yeah, maybe it's not great for the workplace.
No.
So just the stalking app, basically, that's legal is what James is after here.
Yeah. Stalker is the name, is what I'll call it.
I think it should be creepy stalker, not just stalker. And on that bombshell, we're just about out of time. So big thanks to Dave coming on and educating James and I on the ins and outs of Headless. And of course, thanks to my co-host, J-Law. Nice to see you all.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Thanks, everybody, for watching and listening. Take care.
Bye-bye.